Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop arguing, stop explaining yourself, and stop trying to earn someone's approval, their attitude toward you suddenly changes? It feels confusing because, from your perspective, you haven't done anything wrong, you haven't insulted them, you haven't betrayed them, you haven't taken anything from them, yet somehow they begin treating you like you've become the enemy. They criticize your decisions, question your character, spread false stories, or withdraw affection without warning. If you've experienced this, it's easy to assume you must have made a mistake. But sometimes, the very thing that causes another person's resentment is not your weakness, it is your peace. There are people who feel secure only when they can influence how others think, feel, and behave. As long as they can predict your reactions, they feel powerful. They know which words make you feel guilty. They know which accusations make you defend yourself. They know exactly how to push your emotional buttons because your responses reassure them that they still have influence over your life. Every emotional reaction becomes confirmation that they are still at the center of your poor attention. Whether they receive praise or anger, they are still receiving something valuable, your focus. But something remarkable happens when you begin to heal. You stop reacting to every insult. You stop chasing every misunderstanding. You no longer feel responsible for fixing every broken relationship. Instead of allowing someone else's emotions to dictate your day, you begin protecting your own peace. That single change can completely alter the dynamic. Suddenly, the tactics that once worked no longer produce the same results. The guilt doesn't control you. The criticism doesn't define you. The silent treatment no longer terrifies you. You have discovered something they never expected. You can remain calm even when they are trying to create chaos. Peace is incredibly powerful because it cannot be manipulated easily. A calm person is difficult to provoke. A confident person is difficult to intimidate. Someone who has learned emotional self-control is no longer driven by fear, panic, or desperation. Instead of reacting impulsively, they pause, they think, they choose their response carefully. That kind of emotional stability removes the leverage that controlling people depend on. When they realize they can no longer predict or influence your behavior, frustration begins to replace confidence. This is why your peace can become a source of irritation for someone who thrives on control. It exposes a truth they would rather avoid. They begin to realize they are losing the influence they once believed they had over you. Instead of celebrating your growth, they may interpret it as rejection. Instead of respecting your boundaries, they may call you selfish. Instead of acknowledging your maturity, they may accuse you of becoming cold or uncaring. These accusations are often attempts to pull you back into the old cycle where your emotions revolved around their approval. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that not everyone benefits from your growth. Healthy people usually celebrate when they see you becoming stronger, wiser, and more emotionally balanced. They encourage your healing because your peace doesn't threaten them. In fact, your emotional stability often strengthens the relationship. But unhealthy individuals may experience your progress very differently. They may feel as though they are losing something they believed belonged to them. The closer you move toward emotional freedom, the less access they have to your fears, insecurities, and guilt. That loss of influence can feel unbearable to someone who has built relationships around control instead of mutual respect. Think about how different your life becomes when you no longer seek permission to make every decision. You stop over-explaining yourself. You don't feel obligated to justify every choice. You become comfortable allowing others to disagree without rushing to change their opinion. That quiet confidence is difficult to shake because it comes from within rather than from external approval. People who once depended on your uncertainty suddenly discover that their opinions no longer determine your identity. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or insensitive. Genuine peace isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't seek revenge or celebrate someone else's discomfort. True peace simply refuses to surrender its emotional stability to unnecessary conflict. It understands that not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Not every battle deserves your energy. There is tremendous wisdom in recognizing that protecting your inner calm is often more valuable than winning an argument. Many people spend years believing that love means constant sacrifice, endless explanations, and unlimited tolerance. They convince themselves that if they can just be more patient, more understanding, or more accommodating, eventually everything will improve. While kindness is important, peace should never require the destruction of your own emotional well-being. Healthy relationships allow both people to feel safe, respected, and heard. They do not demand that one person constantly abandon themselves to maintain the others, says comfort. As your confidence grows, you begin recognizing patterns you once ignored. You notice conversations designed to confuse rather than communicate. You recognize criticism that serves no purpose except to diminish your confidence. You identify emotional games that once left you exhausted. Instead of becoming angry, you become aware. Awareness changes everything, because manipulation loses much of its power once it is understood. What once felt mysterious becomes predictable. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Ironically, the calmer you become, the more some people may increase their efforts to disturb your peace. They may become louder because your silence unsettles them. They may criticize more intensely because your confidence frustrates them. They may attempt to provoke emotional reactions simply to reassure themselves they still matter. Yet every time you refuse to abandon your emotional balance, you reinforce a new reality. You are no longer living according to someone else's emotional demands. You are making decisions based on wisdom instead of fear. Your peace is not weakness. It is evidence of strength developed through experience. It represents countless moments where you chose healing over bitterness, wisdom over impulsiveness, and self-respect over people-pleasing. That journey is rarely easy. It often requires letting go of unhealthy expectations, confronting painful truths, and accepting that you cannot control another person's choices. But the reward is profound. You gain something far more valuable than approval. You gain ownership of your own life. When someone dislikes you simply because they can no longer disturb your inner calm, remember that their reaction says far more about the battle within them than it does about the person you have become. Continue choosing peace, not because it changes them, but because it transforms you. A peaceful heart is difficult to intimidate, impossible to purchase, and remarkably resilient in the face of unnecessary conflict. And once you discover the freedom that comes from protecting that peace, you begin living with a confidence that no amount of misplaced resentment can ever take away. One of the most significant changes you can make in your life is learning that the word no is not an act of cruelty. It is not disrespect. It is not selfishness. It is one of the healthiest words you will ever learn to use. Yet for many people, saying no feels uncomfortable because they have been taught that their value depends on keeping everyone else happy. They believe that declining a request, disagreeing with an opinion, or protecting their own time automatically makes them a bad person. That belief becomes especially dangerous when dealing with someone who expects unlimited access to your attention, your energy, and your emotions. The moment you begin setting healthy boundaries, you may discover that the people who benefited most from your lack of boundaries are often the first to become upset. Healthy boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out. They are guidelines that protect your emotional well-being while allowing genuine relationships to flourish. They communicate respect for yourself as well as respect for others. A boundary simply says, "This is what I am comfortable with, and this is what I am not willing to accept." It is not an attack. It is not punishment. It is clarity. Unfortunately, people who have grown accustomed to controlling others often interpret clarity as rebellion because they are used to having their expectations accepted without question. Imagine someone who has always expected immediate access to your time. Every phone call is answered. Every demand receives an instant response. Every crisis becomes your responsibility. Over time, this pattern creates an unhealthy expectation rather than a healthy relationship. They stop appreciating your generosity because they begin believing it is something they deserve. The moment you decide to protect your schedule, prioritize your responsibilities, and simply say, "I'm not available right now," they may react with anger instead of understanding. What changed? Not your character, not your kindness. The only thing that changed was your willingness to place healthy limits on your availability. This reaction reveals something important. Healthy people respect boundaries because they understand that everyone has responsibilities, emotions, and limitations. They may feel disappointed when they hear no, but they do not see it as a personal attack. They recognize that every relationship requires mutual respect. Someone who genuinely cares about you wants you to remain emotionally healthy, not emotionally exhausted. They understand that your worth does not depend on constantly sacrificing yourself for everyone else. An unhealthy person often sees boundaries differently. To them, every limit feels like lost control. Every refusal feels like rejection. Every independent decision feels like disobedience. Instead of asking why you need space, they may accuse you of becoming selfish. Instead of respecting your choices, they may attempt to make you feel guilty for making them. This guilt is rarely about solving a problem. It is often about restoring the influence they believe they have lost. If they can make you feel responsible for their emotions, they hope you will remove the boundary and return to old patterns. One of the clearest signs that a boundary is necessary is the intense resistance it receives. People who respect you may ask questions, seek understanding, or express disappointment, but they ultimately accept your decision. People who depend on controlling you often argue, criticize, manipulate, or shame you for having limits at all. They are not necessarily reacting to the specific boundary. They are reacting to the fact that you have demonstrated something they hoped you would never discover, that your life belongs to you. This realization can feel both empowering and uncomfortable. Many people spend years believing they are responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. If someone becomes angry, they immediately search for ways to fix it. If someone feels disappointed, they abandon their own needs to restore peace. If someone withdraws affection, they blame themselves and work even harder to earn approval. These patterns often begin long before adulthood, making them feel completely normal. Breaking those habits requires courage because it means accepting that you cannot control how other people respond to healthy decisions. Boundaries expose motives that often remain hidden when everything is going smoothly. As long as you agree with every request, people may appear supportive, appreciative, and caring. But when you politely decline something that compromises your well-being, their true attitude often becomes visible. Do they respect your decision even when it inconveniences them? Or do they become hostile the moment they no longer get exactly what they want? That response reveals far more about the health of the relationship than years of comfortable other interactions ever could. One of the greatest misconceptions about boundaries is that they create distance between people. In reality, healthy boundaries create stronger relationships because they are built on honesty rather than obligation. When both people feel free to express their needs without fear, trust begins to grow. There is no need for resentment because expectations are clear. There is no need for manipulation because respect replaces control. Boundaries allow love to exist without losing personal identity. Another important truth is that boundaries are not only about saying no to others, they are also about saying yes to yourself. Every time you protect your peace, you are saying yes to your mental health. Every time you refuse unnecessary drama, you are saying yes to emotional stability. Every time you decline disrespect, you are saying yes to your dignity. These decisions may disappoint people who expected unlimited access to your life, but they strengthen your relationship with yourself. There will always be moments when maintaining boundaries feels difficult. You may question whether you are being too firm. You may feel guilty simply because someone else is unhappy with your decision. Remember that guilt is not always evidence that you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt simply reflects that you are doing something unfamiliar. If you have spent years putting everyone else's needs before your own, choosing yourself for the first time can feel uncomfortable. That discomfort does not mean your boundary is unhealthy. It often means you are breaking a habit that no longer serves you. As you continue practicing healthy boundaries, something remarkable begins to happen. Your confidence grows because you realize that your value does not depend on constant approval. Your relationships become more honest because people know where you stand. You spend less time defending yourself and more time living according to your values. Most importantly, you begin attracting people who appreciate you for who you are rather than for what they can take from you. Not everyone will celebrate this transformation. Some people preferred the version of you who never questioned their behavior, never challenged unfair treatment, and never protected your own needs. They may criticize your boundaries because those boundaries expose expectations that were never healthy to begin with. Instead of seeing your limits as wisdom, they may label them as pride, stubbornness, or selfishness. But labels cannot change reality. A respectful boundary is not an act of hostility. It is an act of self-respect. When you calmly say no without anger, when you refuse to apologize for protecting your peace, and when you choose dignity over people-pleasing, you reveal a quiet strength that cannot be manipulated. Your boundaries become a reflection of your healing, your maturity, and your understanding that real love never requires the surrender of your identity. The people who truly value you will learn to respect those boundaries, while those who only with now foul access and control may reveal intentions they kept hidden all along. That is why healthy boundaries do more than protect your peace. They reveal the true foundation upon which every relationship is built. Healing is one of the quietest transformations a person can experience, yet it often produces the loudest reactions from those who once benefited from your pain. At first, this seems completely backward. You would expect people to celebrate your growth, encourage your confidence, and feel happy that you are becoming emotionally stronger. Healthy people usually do. They recognize the courage it takes to confront old wounds, break unhealthy patterns, and choose a better way of living. But not everyone responds that way. Some people become uncomfortable the moment they realize that the version of you they once controlled is slowly disappearing. The stronger you become, the less effective their manipulation becomes, and that change can create frustration they don't fully understand. Healing does not happen overnight. It is built through countless small decisions that often go unnoticed by everyone except you. It begins the day you stop blaming yourself for every conflict. It grows when you realize that another person's anger is not always your responsibility to fix. It becomes stronger each time you refuse to sacrifice your self-respect simply to keep someone else comfortable. These changes may seem small from the outside, but together they completely reshape the way you respond to difficult people. Instead of reacting out of fear, you begin responding with wisdom. Instead of chasing approval, you begin trusting your own judgment. Instead of feeling trapped by guilt, you begin making choices that honor your emotional well-being. For someone who has relied on manipulation, this transformation is deeply unsettling. Manipulation depends on predictability. It depends on knowing exactly which emotions to trigger and which fears to exploit. If they know criticism makes you question yourself, they will criticize. If they know guilt makes you surrender your boundaries, they will use guilt. If they know silence makes you panic, they will withdraw communication until you come running. These patterns work only as long as your emotional wounds remain open. Healing begins closing those wounds, and when that happens, the old strategies gradually lose their effectiveness. Imagine someone who once had the ability to ruin your entire day with a single negative comment. Their words echoed in your mind for hours. You replayed every conversation, wondering what you did wrong and how you could make things right again. Your emotional state depended almost entirely on their opinion of you. But after months or even years of personal growth, something changes. The same criticism still reaches your ears, but it no longer settles in your heart. Instead of immediately believing it, you evaluate it. You ask yourself whether it is fair, truthful, or simply another attempt to control your emotions. That pause changes everything, because manipulation loses much of its power when it is no longer accepted automatically. Healing teaches you to separate your identity from someone else's perception of you. You begin understanding that another person's accusations do not define your character. Their disappointment does not erase your worth. Their inability to appreciate you does not reduce your value. This realization is incredibly freeing because it shifts the source of your confidence from external approval to internal conviction. You stop living as though every opinion is a verdict on your life. Instead, you develop the wisdom to recognize that some opinions reveal more about the speaker than the person being spoken about. As this confidence grows, you naturally begin changing your behavior. You no longer explain every decision in exhausting detail. You stop defending yourself against accusations that were never based on truth. You become comfortable allowing misunderstandings to exist when correcting them would only fuel more conflict. You recognize that not every disagreement deserves your energy. These changes often confuse people who expected you to react exactly as you always had. They may interpret your calmness as indifference or your confidence as arrogance because they cannot understand that your silence now comes from strength rather than fear. One of the greatest signs of healing is learning that your peace is more valuable than proving a point. In the past, you may have believed that every false accusation needed an immediate response. You may have spent hours trying to convince someone of your good intentions, hoping that if you just found the right words, everything would improve. Healing teaches you that some people are not searching for understanding. They are searching for control. No amount of explanation satisfies someone who has already decided to misunderstand you. Recognizing this truth allows you to conserve emotional energy instead of wasting it on impossible conversations. This new perspective changes the entire relationship dynamic. The person who once relied on emotional confusion suddenly discovers that you are no longer participating in the same patterns. Their criticism produces less fear, their guilt creates less obligation, their anger generates less panic. Instead of chasing after them, you remain steady. Instead of trying to repair every emotional storm, you allow them to manage their own feelings. This independence often becomes frustrating because they expected your emotions to remain available for manipulation. Healing also changes the way you see yourself. You begin recognizing strengths that were hidden beneath years of self-doubt. You discover that your kindness does not require self-sacrifice. You realize that compassion and boundaries can exist together. You understand that forgiving someone does not require allowing continued mistreatment. These lessons create emotional maturity that is difficult to shake because it is based on experience rather than wishful thinking. You have lived through enough disappointment to recognize unhealthy patterns before they consume your peace. As you become healthier emotionally, your priorities naturally begin shifting. You invest more time in relationships built on mutual respect instead of constant emotional labor. You focus on personal growth rather than endless conflict. You seek environments where honesty is valued over manipulation and encouragement replaces intimidation. These choices are not acts of revenge. They are evidence that you have learned what your emotional health requires to continue growing. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciates this transformation. Some people preferred the version of you who constantly questioned yourself because that uncertainty made you easier to influence. They felt more comfortable when your confidence depended on their approval. Now they see someone who thinks independently, values personal peace, and refuses to abandon self-respect simply to avoid conflict. Rather than celebrating this growth, they may resent it because it reminds them that they no longer have the same influence they once enjoyed. This resentment often appears in subtle ways. They may accuse you of changing, but what they really mean is that you no longer accept treatment you once tolerated. They may say you have become distant, when in reality you have simply become emotionally healthier. They may insist that you have become selfish because your priorities now include protecting your own well-being. These labels can be painful, especially if they come from someone whose opinion once mattered deeply. But healing gives you the wisdom to recognize that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of becoming emotionally free. Perhaps the most beautiful part of healing is that it cannot be taken away by someone else's frustration. Once you have learned to value yourself, recognize manipulation, and protect your peace, those lessons become part of who you are. You no longer depend on constant reassurance because your confidence has deeper roots. You no longer fear every disagreement because your identity is not built on universal approval. You no longer measure your worth by another person's ability to appreciate you. Your healing may frustrate those who once relied on your insecurity, but that frustration is not evidence that you are moving in the wrong direction. It is often evidence that the unhealthy patterns which once controlled your life are losing their power. Every step toward emotional freedom weakens manipulation, strengthens your character, and reminds you that the greatest victory is not changing someone else's behavior, but becoming the kind of person whose peace can no longer be controlled by it.